Um, well, all popular movements have something in common, but they're pretty different. The Paris Commune took over and ran the city. If you want to find a sort of kind of a parallel in American history, it would be, I think, more like what happened in Western Pennsylvania in the latter part of the 19th century, when, like in Homestead, where there were the mills and the mines and so on. There's a very powerful workers' movement at the time, and they essentially took them over. These were worker-run communities, and in fact, the state had to call in the National Guard to destroy them. It wasn't easy. Another parallel to the Occupy movement, which I don't know how well it's known, is Resurrection City. I don't know if anybody talks about that, but it's quite significant. If you look at, you take the history of the civil rights movement in the United States, say Martin Luther King, great figure, but look at what happened to King. I mean, if you listen to the speeches on Martin Luther King Day, they typically end, the enthusiastic rhetoric ends in 1963 with his I Have a Dream speech. Well, he gave another I Have a Dream speech, a very eloquent one. It was the evening he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And he was there to support a sanitation workers' strike. And he was on his way to Washington to try to organize a poor people's movement. The speech was, had a kind of biblical overtones, the kind he used, and it was basically, the theme was, I can see the promised land. He's saying, it's kind of like Moses. I can see the promised land. I know I'm not going to get there, but you'll get there. And the promised land that he was talking about was not the right to vote. It was rights for poor people. He was concerned about life in the slums, the repression of the poor generally. I mean, it's, race, class are kind of correlated, so it's very heavily black, but not just black by any means. And then he was killed, and then the poor people, there was supposed to be a march from Memphis to Washington. Coretta King, his wife, his widow, led the march, and they went through all the embattled places in the South, Birmingham, Selma, and so on. They ended up in Washington. They set up a tent city in Washington, Resurrection City, where it was going to be the base for approaching Congress to try to get some legislation which would deal with the plight of poor people. Well, Congress, which was the most liberal Congress in American history, they called the police and came in the middle of the night, and smashed up the camp, and drove them out of the city. That's Resurrection City, tent city that, because as far as Northern liberals were concerned, if you wanted to denounce racist Alabama sheriffs, that was fine, but don't come near us.